is
This conference will now be recorded.
great.
Good.
I don't know if you've all heard that, but we were having recording issues there. Um, so this is on developing pilots for both competitive integrated employment and community integrated engagement, and how to do community mapping.
You can get on your
Okay,
phone.
somebody needs to put their phone on mute. We can hear people talking. So why is my there you go. So as we've talked about in several of the previous webinar, the new service model goal, because of all the legislation and litigation and the various regulations, both statewide and federal regulations, what we're encouraging providers to move to is a new service model that focuses on competitive integrated employment infused with community integrated engagement. So what we're going to be talking about today, one of the first things I wanted to do is back up a little bit and talk about examples of some transformation steps towards meeting the settings rule and employment first goals. It's not just about pilots. There are some other things you can do to position yourself as you develop your transformation plans that can get you closer towards those goals. Going to talk about some of the essential steps for implementing a community-based day services pilot program. Same kind of thing for integrated competitive employment pilot. What are the essential steps? And what are some of the essential resources necessary for success and sustainability of these pilots? Kind of bottom line, none of this is rocket science. A lot of it is common sense, and it's just using a team to plan to move forward. So some examples of transformation steps that can get you closer to the employment first and settings rule goals. What I found amazing, I was working in Michigan with one provider, and it was a very rural provider who was going through some leadership transition, and they actually did everything in 1 year that I'm listing here. One of the first things they did was move their soft skill training to typical community sites. So instead of doing, interviewing skill training or doing resumes at the typical center, they moved all that kind of training, pre-vote kinds of work, to the community libraries, to recreation centers, to maybe even Starbucks or McDonald's, where the participants would have opportunities for integration with non-disabled people. They started accepting new referrals only for community-based services. They set a date to phase out accepting referrals for their facility-based services. So they had to have a communication plan to all these potential participants and their parents, and to the current people who were involved in the services. They took their work crews that were being paid through a contract with a variety of people, and they made the work crews time-limited training experiences. They started looking at the work crew experience as a training program where they could see what interest and what skills people had and they made them like 6 months and gave people the opportunity to learn these skills, and for the staff to observe people in these variety of work experience sites to help them better understand what permanent competitive integrated employment opportunities they could match them up to. In some cases, they were able to convince these work crew employers or sheltered workshop opportunities to have the employers pay participants directly. So the service provider got out of the way of the relationship between the employer, and they just focused on providing the support services to them, not being the direct employer themselves. Some providers, and particularly this one that I'm thinking of in Michigan, they raise workshop salaries to minimum wage from the business income, not from Medicaid or state monies, because that would really not be allowable. But if this was really a successful business to raise the salaries up to minimum wage for those folks. They were also able to convince some of the employers to provide space at their regular business, and instead of being at a sheltered workshop, they moved this operation directly into an employer's integrated workspace. In another case, they had a very successful workshop enterprise, and they just spun it off. There was a major contractor that was supplying the work to the participants, and they convinced the employer just to take over the entire operation. And then they just continued to do the support services for those folks who needed it. And finally, it's really changing your focus as a provider and to focus on just finding and supporting employment participants in competitive integrated employment opportunities, rather than creating, these special businesses that employed just folks with disabilities. So I had one provider in Michigan who was under a lot of stress, new leadership, new funding. It was very difficult, but they were able to pull off everything I just mentioned on both of these slides within 1 year, and became really a totally integrated program that was well underway to both employment first goals and the settings rule. So our primary focus today is really to talk about these other two transformation steps, and that's developing pilots for integrated community engagement and competitive integrated employment. So how do you do that, and why do you do that? So how do we make this happen? First question is, why do we want to even consider developing pilots? Well, if you start out small and you have just a handful of participants and a couple staff that you begin to immerse in this pilot project, you can identify and address specific issues and challenges on a very small scale. You can make small mistakes. You don't want to make big mistakes as you start moving your services into the community. And you can be creative. You can try out and revise all kinds of creative strategies. And you can find out how you can create buy-in from participants and family and staff. You want to start with people who are willing and able to go out into the community. So you want to really begin this new service delivery model with a handful of people who want to be in the community. And what's really good about this is then you get a feel for how much this is going to cost. What is your true budget and not just wishful thinking. So creating the community-based day support pilot, the integrated community engagement. This pilot is designed for three different kinds of participants. One, it's folks who are working age who may be on a pathway to employment, that they've talked about that they really want to be in competitive integrated employment. So you're going to target those people. The next one is a supplemental service for people who are employed, but they're just employed perhaps part-time, and they need a full program structured throughout the day that could give them perhaps other skills or other opportunities to explore what their interests could be. Somebody needs to put their phone on mute, hearing a lot of noise. And then the third part is people who are of retirement age, who really don't want to work, or maybe it's somebody younger who just doesn't want to work, but needs a structured and supervised program. And this will help you meet the settings rule because it's be community-based. So getting started, you've got to set the groundwork about what community-based day services is, who's going to be involved, what people are going to be served. You've got to have a communication plan to everybody involved. You're going to conduct some community mapping activities where you're going to explore and document what are the education, recreation, and volunteer opportunities in your community. And it doesn't matter if it's very urban, if it's suburban, if it's rural. You've got a whole variety of activities here that you can offer as a menu to people. And then, and I'm going to say this several times throughout this presentation, you need to think carefully about what you're trying to accomplish. What you're trying to accomplish is relationship building skills, routines, often when we're operating a sheltered workshop or center-based activities, we're not really developing those skills that are necessary for employment, where we're giving people opportunities to come and go, maybe to the work crew whenever they feel like it. And that's really not preparing them for real life. That's creating some kind of parallel universe that the rest of us don't live in. And that's the whole focus of being in the community, why the settings rule are moving us into the community, and employment first is very big on integrated employment opportunities. So people have relationships, routines, and employment skills. So that's the focus that we as providers really need to hone in on. That this isn't van therapy, this isn't field trips, that this is an education in the community to learn independent skills. Uh, so community mapping for the pilot. We need to start out with a broad range of team members. So you want the handful of direct service people who are going to be key in implementing this. You want families and the handful of participants that you've selected. You want some, middle managers and the COO and perhaps the CEO. They're going to sit down and, as a group, brainstorm and inventory the community and education and recreation sites that are very local and that we pretty much all know about if we put our heads together. We're also going to inventory in the community all the nonprofit volunteer opportunities. In addition to that, we're going to take a look at where can we meet in the communities. Is it a recreation center? Is it a library? Maybe it's McDonald's or Starbucks, or maybe it's a church. It could be a whole variety of things. So it's eventually, in addition to being out in the community and doing education, recreation, and volunteer experiences, sooner or later down this path, why do we need to come to the center at all? That if there are community sites that we can begin and end our day at, we'll want to transition to that over the long term. And then we're going to document all of this so that the direct service staff know exactly what's at each site, what they're supposed to do, what learning experiences are there, and how to plug this into all the data recording necessary for Medicaid and everybody else. So community mapping, it's something that you really need to do in an organized way. You've got to catalog all these experiences, the education, recreation, and volunteer, and it's essential for the startup of the new service. So before you do anything else, you're going to take your team and sit down and begin to make this happen. And how you can do this, there's a variety of ways to pull this information together. One, even in some rural areas, there'll be some websites that you can go to find information. I think I've got a couple here. Volunteermatch.org is one, and they'll have a format that talks about the kinds of basic areas, the skill areas that you could volunteer in, and what are the age groups, and where is it? This is an example. Is it local or is it virtual? Is it something that you can do on a computer? There's meetup.com, where is it a knitting group, a tennis group, a fishing group, whatever, where people could do education or recreation stuff together. So you need to search these areas, and you need to come up with your own database. It would be nice if it would be affordable for you to find an IT person, a tech person, to help build your own, electronic database. So you know who the contact person is, how much things cost, just where the location is, what skill areas are, part of this experience, so that the direct service person, as they look at the person-centered plan for each of their participants, they can begin to match this to them and offer a personalized menu for people. Um, Identify how staff will contribute to the agency's community mapping. You really want to put the word out, not just to the families and to the direct service staff that are participating in the pilot, but put a call out there to everybody at the agency, to the board members, to the staff, to other families, that you're beginning this pilot and you're really looking for input from everyone. You want to buy in from everyone, and you want to continue to communicate with them to grow a vested interest from the entire agency population. And you want to says put out alerts by email. You might have contests with staff of who come up with the best ideas and prizes and that sort of thing. And you can ask people in the larger community about education, recreation, or volunteer opportunities that maybe even the staff aren't aware of. Then, as you begin to put this together and document these variety of experiences, you want to have the staff who are involved to practice this. We're going to talk a little bit about the person-centered planning, but I know in the last webinar you've also talked about that, so we're going to do a quick review for you. But as you identify what people's skills and interests are, then have the direct service staff go through your database, be it electronic or just pen and paper in a file cabinet, and go through and begin to come up with a weekly schedule that fits both individual and small group interest and skills. Decentralizing the service. You're going to have the staff, the team, the participants, and the couple staff that you selected for the pilot come up with the activity schedule for the week. So you've got, maybe 15, 20 different activities that you initially come up with. Plan out the week, and it doesn't have to be the whole week. It could be a couple hours, a couple days a week. It could be every morning, every day a week, because some of the participants may not have the stamina yet to be out in the community the whole time. And the whole purpose of this is to start out really small and get your feet wet and slowly move forward and to develop a weekly schedule. So start out small with just a couple hours, a couple days a week, so you get the routine. Initially, as you put your team out there, of maybe 3 or 4 participants with one staff and maybe another staff as a backup person, you want to begin and end the day at the center while you slowly expand the experiences in the community for the small group. And the reason why you want to start that way is you want to give both the participants and the staff an opportunity before and after their community experiences to share this with other participants and staff. You want to build the excitement. We were in a pretty rural program in Martin, Tennessee, that our agency took over, and it was totally center-based. And we ended up identifying one of the staff who became our new day program manager. And he started out exactly this way. He had like 3 participants, 1 staff, another staff as a backup. They sat down, they did a menu, they had everybody share their ideas about what a schedule could be that was exciting, that was fun. Are we going to go to the animal shelter? Or, are we going to go to the library or the museum or whatever it may be? And had then the pilot group of participants sit down and pick what they wanted to do this week. And the focus was then for them on skill development, relationship building, and workforce routines like being on time, having some social skills of properly greeting people like you would in a work day. And eventually they would grow these experiences so that it was a full day, a full week, and when they got there, they would begin and end the day in the community. So the three areas that I keep talking about of learning new skills. So, they would learn travel options, travel training, observe people doing various jobs and tasks in the community, soft skill development, sample different jobs. And to give you an example of this, where was I? I was actually in Alabama. And there's a great program in Alabama. I won't mention names. One of you are on the phone. And I heard about how they went to Walmart and they created a relationship with the HR director at Walmart and asked the HR director if they would take the small group of participants on tour of the store and talk about the various jobs that he had. And then the next thing you knew, after they began this relationship, they asked the HR director, could some people, employees there, like show some of the participants, just how do you mop a floor, or how do you stack, or how do you, unload the truck, or, begin an inventory. So they got slowly but sure a buy-in in this relationship building to where the HR director became very familiar with the participants and offered a couple of them jobs. The other thing is learning routines. What's expected at employment or volunteer sites. You got to be on time. You've got to dress certain ways. That there's certain expectations of behaviors that, you greet people by shaking their hand, not by hugging them. Developing relationships, seeing positive role models where that relationship with the HR director or the manager of the store can become a reference if it's a volunteer job and lead to maybe a job someplace else. So we're decentralizing services. So you begin to document these schedules and the individual skill development. And I think in the last webinar you talked about that. And I'm going to show you again how to do that. You begin to expand the pilot over time as the budget permits, as you're figuring out what funding sources, perhaps adding new funding sources to it. So you're adding more participants and staff, more teams going out into the community, and you're expanding the community experiences that are afforded people. We always started out with willing participants. We would talk it up. We would have a communication plan about how exciting it would be. You always have some staff and some participants who are reluctant, don't want to do that, that they're, pretty happy being at the center. But, you can always find a handful of people who really want to do more than be at the center. So you start with those folks and you give them the opportunity to come back and to talk it up with the rest of the gang. Over time, as you build your groups in the community, both in numbers of people involved and the experiences that are afforded them, you can think about regionalizing your services and your sites and mixing and matching participants and staff. When I was saying we were in Martin, Tennessee, and we had about 100 people in a typical center-based day program. People, occasionally went on field trips, not much. And we had about 100 people in a sheltered workshop. And, we were told everybody was pretty happy, wanted to be in the sheltered workshop. They were with their friends. They were making money. We started with the small groups. People came back so excited because we matched their community experiences to their interests and skills. And we gave them opportunities to, at the beginning and the end of the day, to talk to their friends. And the group slowly built. Well, we were serving at that time a 5-county area. So people could have been on one of our vans for maybe an hour getting to the center. We started out in Martin, Tennessee with all these experiences, but over time we realized that in fact, in 5 counties, there were maybe like 20 small towns or more in this location, and that we really didn't need to bus people an hour one way, and just waste a lot of time. And in the wintertime, it would be snowy and dangerous and all that. So what we started thinking about is matching staff. Where did the staff live? Where do participants live? And starting creating all these other sites in the local towns that people were living in. So we would develop local relationships that became much more sustainable, and it was much more successful in that we were matching people to their community, and we were saving a lot of money too. We weren't transporting people in vans that we were often very frightened of in the wintertime and all the conditions of heavy rain and, all the things that can happen when you have a fleet of vans. So some of the things that are really important is you just can't throw this together. You've got to have a planning team. You've got to sit down. You got to make assignments. This has to be a business meeting. You've got to document what people are saying. And to not just create the menu of volunteer recreation and education, but to design the entire experience. You've got to have your accounting staff involved. If you've got a development or fundraising staff, you want them involved, your HR staff, the whole team, because you're going to have to do budgeting. Do your rates currently, are they sufficient to really make this work? By doing a pilot, you can identify where the shortfalls are, or in the interim, while you might be advocating for higher rates with the state. And I know in Alabama, there's a significant rate study going on right now to facilitate all that, to get going, because the settings rule is going to kick in 2022. You might want to do some fundraising. That's what we did. We did foundations, some family foundations, the Developmental Disabilities Council. there's Kiwanis, Civitans, Lions, church groups that you might go to as you try to determine how much each one of these pilot teams is going to cost and what additional resources they might need. You're going to have to do timelines for all of this. This is a business plan. You're transitioning from a center-based program to a community-based program. You know, I was talking to some of my friends who do technical assistance, like Jenny and I do, and it's pardon me if this sounds crude to some people, but if you're a McDonald's hamburger place and you're specializing in serving the best kind of hamburger possible, quality services, and now you're transitioning to only home delivery, I mean, you still are providing this quality service, to create a independent, happy person. But now you've moved the entire location to home delivery. And so staff have to be trained a different way. You've got to figure out all of the essential components of moving your business into a different direction. You still might have a lot of the same components to it, but a lot of the bits and pieces and parts that are moving have changed. And so you've got to plan it out, and you've got to have a timeline to go with your plan. One thing that is real important, and I don't think I've talked about this before with you, is leadership. There was a gentleman I met at a conference in Pennsylvania who put this little presentation together. And he talked about that in Oklahoma and in California, they were moving people out of institutions into community homes in the 1990s. And in addition to moving them into, regular neighborhoods, very small supported living units, they were interested in providing community employment for these folks who were moving out of the institution. In Oklahoma, 32% ended up in integrated employment. And in California, it was just 5%. So out of the 403 people in Oklahoma, they got 128 real jobs, competitive integrated jobs in the community. And in California, out of 2,143, only 99 got real jobs. So they were conducting a study of what could explain this. Was it the differences in the people, the age, the gender, ethnicity, I can never say that word, ability level, secondary disabilities, challenging behaviors? They knew it had to be one of those. And so they started doing comparisons, correlations to, who got a job and did any of this make a difference. And what they discovered was none of that made a difference. That it was really the leadership in moving people out of the institutions and into their community integrated experiences altogether. So what I'm saying to you is you might have a lot of obstacles. You might think that the funding isn't sufficient, that, participants, may be reluctant, staff may be reluctant, regulations are written appropriately. But why this struck me is I've shared my experiences with you of converting our agency that was initially located in Washington, D.C., and we ended up in 5 states, and we took over about a dozen other agencies, and we converted them all. That every state we were in had all of their new complexities to it. But in the long run, it came down to me and my leadership team of working around these obstacles, working through them, coming up with solutions to every problem ourselves. And in time, we had over 900 people in community participation, both competitive integrated employment and community engagement without any buildings. And that was in 5 states that had world's differences in funding and regulations and other kinds of issues, rural versus urban. It really never, mattered. It was really more up to us. So the first thing is think big, start small, scale quickly. Think big. What is your long-term vision for your agency? Is it to be totally community-based? Are you going to hold back? Are you going to have some services at the center? Every agency is different. You can, do it in your unique way. But people are supposed to be provided services, especially through Medicaid, in the community with non-disabled people as much as possible. You want to develop your pilots to develop skills, routine, and relationships, and you want to work out all of your procedures to facilitate that, and you want to do that on a small scale before you roll it out and have a lot of people and a lot of staff in the community where things can go wrong if you don't have it planned out. The vision, Jenny has worked with these agencies, and this was the Arc of Tuscaloosa's vision, that individuals have jobs in competitive integrated employment, individuals receive pre-employment training outside of the facility, individuals are independent and actively participating in all aspects of the community. So you start out with your vision or mission statement. Here's another one where the St. Clair said that they would cease accepting referrals to facility-based service at a certain date in time. So you want to be concrete about your vision and have a shared vision, have vested interest by everybody in that vision. You want to have a communication plan. This is going to support the whole movement of developing both of your pilots. One of our future webinars is going to talk specifically about developing the communication plan. So you want everybody on board moving simultaneously in the same direction. You're going to have a transportation component. You've got to figure this out. And there's a whole array of things you can do. You can get families to help move people into the community, into jobs. If you've got a bus system, taxis, if you're in a big town, subways, you can have your agency vehicles. A lot of agencies are downsizing their vehicles. The Department of Transportation, pretty much in every state, has federal flow-through money to help you buy new vehicles and come up with a system of using tax vehicles, making sure that cars are inspected and staffed.
Tom, you're breaking up. I don't know where it's on your end or our end, but you're breaking up right now.
Okay. I don't know what I'm doing.
That's good now. It just started cutting in and out. I was hearing breaking up anyway.
Okay.
That's better.
So there's a whole variety of things you can do to individualize your transportation. What we did is go to enterprise corporate leasing, and we began to trade in all of our vehicles and downsize them to meet the needs of each one of our teams. So you need to really plan that out as a team. You've got to figure out how you're going to fund this. And I know Alabama is going through a lot of changes right now. And, you'll be hearing more about that from, I guess, Byron and some of the leadership in Alabama. But they're really behind the providers trying to make this work. And, you need to reach out to other potential funders. And there's a whole array of funding out there that can help with developing these pilots. If anybody has any in-depth questions about these funding sources, and Byron has a lot of information, and we can help too. Just shoot myself or Jenny an email, and we'll give you some background information of what we know about Alabama funding. As I said, you want to start with the willing and able in your direct service pilot team. There's going to be another webinar just on HR, on human resources and how to develop teams and what kinds of staff and what kinds of training you need to provide to these people. So that's coming up in the next couple months. But overall, you want to have a recruitment and orientation for your staff based on employment first skills that are needed. You want to send your key staff, your direct service staff to ACRE training, as well as your middle managers. You want to make sure that you have sufficient trained staff to do this. You don't want somebody out in the community who really can't represent your agency. You want to have sufficient community and job developers. Have somebody in charge of putting together all of these community sites and documenting them who can help the direct service people in the planning process. And a job developer would do the same thing of exploring in the community the variety of jobs that might be available. Have sufficient managers to support community activities. You really want to have managers move from behind that desk at the center to supporting your staff and the participants in the community. So you'll have a whole new change of staff behavior, and we'll talk about that in a future webinar. In the customer, some of the essentials here, again, beginning with people who are interested and want to be in the community, developing a community manual and having participants and families help you put it together. We have a template for you, if you haven't gotten it from Jenny or myself, of what are the procedures you need to give staff and family guidance, everything that can go wrong, what procedures do you have in place to address that. You want to have benefits training for families about ABLE accounts and through VOC Rehab. A lot of families are reluctant to be more in the community because they might lose their benefits. Well, there's a lot of training that you can provide to help them overcome some of those fears. You want to, as I said earlier, give opportunities for peers to share their success stories, and you want to focus on person-centered planning. Person-centered planning, here is a simple way to do this, and there's an article to go with this of how to do it. If I haven't shared that with you yet, send me an email and I'll give you these forms and the article that goes with it, where the team sits around and looks at, with the participant, what are their dreams and goals for the future, their interests, their learning style, who is this person that you're trying to facilitate community engagement and competitive integrated employment for. So you're learning a lot more about them, and you're continuing to update this as time goes on. And you come up with a personal profile that looks something like this, that the team can look at as they begin to match the people to activities. You build the initial pilot group with a diverse group of individuals. I was in Ohio, and I had this young manager in a training just break down and start crying. And I asked her what was wrong. And she said, she points out the window and says, there's a Starbucks across the street. And I've got this one guy who is in a wheelchair, and all he wants to do is go over there and have a cup of coffee just like everybody else, and, create some friends and, just enjoy life. And I can't do that. I can't do that simple thing. I can't take him over there to Starbucks. And I said, well, why can't you? What's the holdup? And she said, I've got 3 people in wheelchairs. And it's like, in the center-based program, they had grouped everybody by the same disability. And of course you can't take 3 people in wheelchairs to the same place. It's just not doable with one staff. But I said, blow up the model that you have for grouping at the center and just think very creatively. So, you have somebody maybe who is not as high intellectually functioning, but who can follow directions, who can push that wheelchair. That's all you need. And then have somebody else who also wants to go get a cup of coffee. So you want to just really rethink how you create your caseload mix. You might want to consider populations from other referral sources. If you're taking people from voc rehab who may not even have an intellectual disability, they might have some other kind of disability. You might want to consider specializing among your employment staff of who is assigned what kind of participant and with special needs. And most importantly, as we talk about developing pilots, I always get the question, well, what about the person who has these severe behavior problems, maybe has some other physical conditions, they come up with the worst case scenario. And it's like, don't focus on the person with the most challenges. Look for people that you can group together that have some kind of common interest that would enjoy these education, recreation, volunteer experiences that can complement each other for the pilot. And you'll learn more about the community experience. You'll learn more about the individuals. You'll learn more about all the different challenges over time. So eventually you'll get to the person with the more significant challenges. And you'll be better equipped by the time you get to them. So don't focus on that right away. Jenny, in I think the last webinar, talked about here's a meeting schedule. And this is the group. You can see at the top, this is group number 4 and all the different individuals that you can mix and match. And so you can document this for when you're monitored for the settings rule. Here you are out in the community. Then you can pull this out and have an individual schedule for people too, about what they're going to do, what skills they're going to focus on in each part of their day. And then maybe it's every week, maybe it's every other week, maybe it's once a month. The direct service person sits down and writes down what skills the person has learned through the variety of experiences. So this is a sample form that you can use that have been talked about in other webinars. For competitive integrated employment, you've got a lot of the same funding sources. But for this group that you're trying to find jobs for, it's how do you determine who to start with first? And that goes back to the team process, that a lot of times you've got departments within your agencies, you've got your pre-voc people, and you've got your employment people, and then you have your day program people. You need to get all these folks together. Just because somebody's in the center-based day program doesn't mean they don't want a job or could get a job. So you need to bring these managers together and come up with a way to prioritize, who are we going to target first for a job. And you're going to write this down, and you're going to include case management, residential services, and family members as much as possible. So you create this planning team, and you, through the person-centered planning process, you find who is interested in integrated competitive employment. Think about the community-based day services as a wraparound to the employment. So I always like to think about doing the community-based day program first. That's a little more solid because you've got to give people a full day of services, regardless, of if they're interested in employment or not. And from that experience of being in the community, you learn more and about the individual and can update your person-centered planning information now that people are out there, so it can help you target people being in employment. But, essentially, even though I focus a lot on the community-based day stuff, you really want to do these simultaneous too. So your job developer, while all this is going on, is beginning to identify businesses where a variety of tasks could be performed. And oftentimes you can go in and do customized employment experiences. Job developer goes into a business, a McDonald's, a Walmart, whatever it could be, and you say to the employer, I want to learn more about your business. I might have somebody in the future that I could match to meet your needs. And sometimes what you discover is that the business has inefficiencies. There was this one employer, it was a Steinmart, that is the clothing business. And the job developer went in and asked to learn more about the business. The manager took them around, showed them a lot of how the business works. The job developer stayed and watched by themselves and discovered that a lot of the time that the staff could be helping customers, they were back in the back room unloading and sorting and labeling a lot of the merchandise. And so they said to the manager, I've got somebody who really loves to sort and match and do that kind of work. How about giving them a try and letting your staff be more on the floor helping customers? And they did. And it was a young man with autism who that was really his thing, and he really enjoyed doing that kind of work. So, it's developing these relationships in the business. You really need to think about geography and transportation. I had one provider who found a job like 20 miles away from where the person lived. And the CEO of the agency found it and was just giving the staff grief because this wasn't working out. And it's like, this really isn't realistic. You've got to start in at least the local area where people live and, where their community is. You've got to think about their support requirements, what kind of benefit considerations, and then begin to identify specific businesses to contact to begin this exploration process. So the job developer creates employer relationships. They create internships, work trials, tours, interviews for the participants in the pilot program. they begin to develop these supported and customized opportunities that match the interests and skills, and they help the direct service staff develop all the support systems that they need, which might be transportation, communication devices, technology. In some states, for people with higher intellectual abilities, they're using FaceTime. And, a lot of your participants probably have iPhones, and to check in with them every, 45 minutes, every hour or so, see how they're doing, show me what work you're doing, let me talk to your supervisor there. And in some states, that's allowed as billable hours. So you want this to be as natural in the community as possible, and not always staff tagging along. Creating resumes, both in your volunteer work experience and in the other activities, employment activities that the person is engaged in. You want to take a lot of photos for your communication plan. You want to put it on your website, on your brochures. You want to get away from, it's like almost 95% of the agencies I work with, if you look at your webpage or your brochures, here's 3 or 4 and maybe 5 people with disabilities standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, smiling or hugging or something. And it's like, you want to get away from this visual presentation of helplessness, of taking care of. You want to take pictures of the person engaged in volunteer activities, of action shots of them with the manager of the business, or them feeding the animals at the animal shelter. You want to convey the message of, valued contributing member of the community. While you're out there, you want to document all the names, titles, contact information for all the references for these experiences. And you want to always show positive attributes of the people that you're supporting. We're going to talk about later a lot about data collection. And I think that's going to be in our resource reallocation and data collection webinar towards the end of this webinar series. But there's information you want to be keeping about how many hours do people work, how much are they in the community, a lot of specifics like that, especially for your monitoring of the settings rule, and also as a team to show to yourself how you're moving forward in this whole transformation process. Over the long term, for both pilots, you're going to be decentralizing services, which will have an impact on both your participants and your staff. You're going to be adding technology as you go. You might end up, we use TheraAb a lot and had, I think it was initially 20 handheld computers donated by a tech firm so that we could do data entry in the community. Staff didn't have to come back to the center. And decentralization of services, you're going to slowly but surely be moving people closer to their home where they have natural support systems. So kind of bottom line, it's not rocket science. It's starting small, figuring out all of your procedures, getting the willing and able, both staff and participants, excited about this, having a good communication plan, sharing all of these exciting experiences, and just need to go do it. I've been working with one of an agency who has gone through all of this planning for about a year or so and was just fairly anxious, maybe even frightened a little bit about going into the community. Once you've done all your planning, you just have to jump. You have to trust your instincts and just go do it. Start out small and scale quickly. And that's me. And as I said at the beginning of this, if you have questions, if I have promised you something in terms of resource materials and you haven't seen them yet, please send me an email and remind me. The last month I've been very distracted and I'm trying to refocus and make sure you have all the resources that you need. But hopefully this short explanation will help you on your way to provider transformation and being both developing services in the community for the settings role and to begin to look for your competitive integrated employment opportunities. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Byron, for hosting us.
You're welcome. Do we have any burning questions before we end? All right.
Well, if you think of something, either the best way is to send me an email, and I'll try and be very responsive to you.
And we'll get you some information on the next scheduled webinar when that is all set and confirmed. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.